Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we're going to be reviewing two new foreign films, or at least foreign if you live in the United States or an English speaker. We'll be reviewing Alice Diop's Saint Omer later in the show. But first up, we're going to be talking about an international A24 release. I believe it was A24, I think. Yes. Close. This is a Belgian film directed by Lucas Dont, a director I have no familiarity with. I only kind of knew a little bit about this movie going into it. The premise is that 13-year-old boys Leo and Remy have a close friendship at school and in the flower fields where they and their parents pick the harvest for home. When schoolmates shoot a wedge into the relationship, the consequences are fatal. So, Ariana, what did you think of Close?
I thought Close was beautifully shot to the point that there are times that things feel like an oil painting or a watercolor. The lighting was so good. And the story is very good where you're not being like bombarded with this being like, it's a gay story, guys. We don't have anyone sitting down and explaining gender norms or sexuality to anybody.
It's not a didactic film. There's not a bunch of exposition. So it's a movie that respects the audience's intelligence to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and I think it kind of pulls you into that feeling of being a child during that time and that things aren't explicitly.
And by that time, you don't mean time period, just that age.
Yeah, that age where things aren't explicitly like sexual. It more has to do with the emotional weight in where you don't understand it. You're just going with the flow of it.
Yeah, I would agree with your comment on the technical aspects of the movie. The cinematography is incredible. Not just that mix of blocking and lighting, so like how a shot is framed and the way light and shadow are used. I also found the color saturation to be really good. There's a lot of scenes that take place in, I believe they're supposed to be kind of like tulip fields because this is in Belgium, which neighbors the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And every color is vivid without like kind of blowing the color out. It's just like the perfect boldness you would want. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's a film that approaches its subject matter with a lot of tenderness and a lot of subtlety. It's funny because apparently there are like reviewers from festivals and things who are calling the film like manipulative.
How so?
And very like maudlin. They're trying to frame it as a movie that like sort of telegraphs the emotions to the audience. And that made me just think, have you seen American movies? Because those movies telegraph emotions to people. This movie, like, what am I supposed to do? Hate the kids? Like, you're not going to hate the kids. It's just hard to hate kids. And I think what it does is it would have been very easy for Leo to have been villainized by the movie.
Yeah.
And the movie refuses to do that. And it says this is more complex than that. And let's explore the complexity of the situation and how there's no villain. Like it's a movie about homophobia, but not cartoonish in the way American movies are, where there'll be this sort of exaggerated bully or something. Yeah. It's a more subtle homophobia where it's just kids picking up on things they notice and they don't necessarily mean to harm anyone. It's just a thing that kids do by teasing.
Like, that's odd. I'm not used to that. Or, well, if you're going to be what you are, just say it loud and proud. And
the boy's not even being aware that they're supposed to be something.
Yeah, and I think it's also the fact that we're dealing with children that, like, being the age of 13, you're on that, like, cusp of being a child going into adulthood and becoming a teenager where play is essentially taken away from you. But it's also the fact that, like, particularly like in male relationships, that closeness is supposed to be forbidden at a certain point. Like, you know,
You're not
Or
supposed to be that intimate.
yeah, like, a toddler's holding hand, that's fine, but like,
A 13-year-old boys holding hands is bad to a
or
lot of
leaning
people.
against each other, or like being affectionately, like physically affectionate towards each other is considered like a bad thing. And what's interesting is, like you said, we don't even have bullies within the adults. None of
Yeah.
the adults remark on it. There's never a moment where, a mom goes to, like, for example, like Leo's mom goes to him to be like, hey, you guys are having too many like sleepovers. You need to stop.
Well, I feel like
Becoming a man. It's just like,
it's more like nobody ever really tells them to stop hanging out with each other. It's the observations of the other children cause Leo to bristle and push Remy away.
yeah.
And like I like how somebody said, it's not even a film about masculinity. It's a film about that process moving from innocence into an awareness of prejudice in the world and the way certain things feel uncomfortable because of they're unfamiliar. And uh yeah, I thought it handled the idea of someone realizing they're gay in a way I've never seen in a movie before.
Yeah, where it's sort of like there is, obviously, from what we're seeing, is a lack of representation for them, and that is why the like homophobia becomes an internal homophobia.
Yeah.
It becomes a subtle homophobia, because it's not as if like we're seeing them flip through the channels and seeing like, men kissing, or reading books about like gay men, and someone like, nobody's going ew. It's just they don't have it represented to them in their day-to-day life. So of course the response is going to be, well, this isn't normal. The other kids aren't doing it, like particularly the boys. Like at the beginning, it's supposed to be like they kind of start school, and it's the girls that are asking them, are you a couple? Are
Yeah.
you together?
The other boys seem to be kind of oblivious to it or don't care.
Not that they're oblivious. It's because the boys are more side-eyeing, looking at them weird, and the girls just verbalize what's going
They're
on
more upfront
in
about it.
a teasing fashion. But you do notice like glances that other boys do at them.
It's so subtle.
Like it's subtle enough, but like when you are that young, the insecurity is going to creep in, and you don't want to be different.
What I feel like Eden Dumbreen, who plays Leo, who's the sort of protagonist of the film, incredible child actor. I feel like
Yeah.
oftentimes child actors, it's really rough. They just don't necessarily have that background of life experience to inform their performances. So they're basically mimicking what they think it should look like. But everything in Eden's performance is it's exactly the way you would expect it to be, and it feels so authentic and feels like it comes from a genuine place.
I think it serves the fact that since we don't have a lot of, exposition given out,
Yeah.
like verbally, this is not a child that has to go in. We never hear any of them go, no, I am not gay.
Yeah.
Or
like homosexual and gay, those things I don't think they're said out loud during the
never
movie.
said out loud. Like at no point is either child having an exposition explaining like the history of their friendship.
There's no coming out
There's
scene.
no coming out scene. There is, which is authentic, because when you think about being that age, would you have had the vocabulary to explain what was going through with such intense emotions? You just knew to go with it. You just knew that like something felt off and you wanted to be like the other kids, or like, I feel this intense emotion, what am I supposed to do with it, kind of thing. And then you're looking around mimicking. And that's exactly what Leo's doing, especially because in the film, he's the one that is more of a target for being bullied compared to everybody else.
Well, he has what we would classify as more feminine behaviors, like the way he carries himself, kind of doesn't feel in this sort of stereotypically masculine way we might accept.
Yeah.
And I think that wasn't interesting in the movie is he's the one who pushes Remy away. And I wonder if it's almost because that character of Leo is supposed to kind of understand that, oh, I would be what they call a sissy. So I need to distance myself from Remy in order to like fight back against that thing I've already have going against me.
Yeah. And it feels like that because it's like the way that he moves is very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
He is like a gangly kind of kid, very thin.
Mhm.
Remy, although is
Very
kind of,
delicate.
yeah, delicate looking. Although Remy, you could be like, oh, he is just as delicate because he plays an instrument. But it's
His mannerisms just feel like middle school boy, right?
yeah, but like Remy feels a little bit almost set and like serious
Yeah.
at times, and just kind of does what there's an assertiveness about him that like feels as if he's just gonna do whatever it is that he wants and feels comfortable with. But Leo's the one that's like
A lot of insecurity.
seems more insecure, but then towards what ends up happening in the film, like that is just what we're picking up on them because of the performance.
I do think there's a scene that like stuck out to me as soon as I saw it, and I was like, "Wow, I've never seen a scene that good, especially from a child actor." It's when Remy is practicing on I think he plays an oboe. I'm not good with my instruments.
Yeah, I think that's
But he's playing an oboe, and Leo's just kind of there in the house hanging out, and it's a shot of Leo watching Remy practice, and Leo is just so in love with this kid, like,
yeah.
and it feels so like pure and genuine, just his like admiration for Remy's ability to play this instrument. And it's one of those where I'm like, man, for a kid actor to pull that emotion out and without any dialogue, just looking like that's a level of talent and acting we don't see often in adult actors.
Well, I think it also says to you like what the direction was given.
Yes.
Because that means the director knew how to handle these child actors to make them as authentic as possible.
And there's a lot of child actors in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that none of them ever play off as like stiff and like it feels like a kid acting. Every kid in this movie feels like a real kid.
Yeah, they do.
One thing that I had as a realization watching this movie, probably thanks to the fact that we ingest THC in the evenings, because it's that allows the brain to kind of just go with the flow. I'm watching this movie and I had this realization thinking back to like where we used to live in Middle Tennessee. You know, I was homeschooled growing up. I'm autistic. So like my entire perspective on what it's like to grow up as a kid in America is so different from the average kid. It's one of those things I've come to the realization of is I don't know what it's like to grow up as a kid in America. I know what it was like to grow up as me in America, and it was not a lot of fun.
But I think it's also you do relate to a certain degree because now there's such severe isolation amongst kids when you think about it.
And so I never, like I can say very truthfully, I never had close friendships growing up. I mean, being homeschooled didn't help.
Yeah.
Living I was like 9, 10 years old, we moved to the middle of nowhere, and that didn't help because we had no neighbors. And so I never really had, close friendships, male, female, otherwise, right? But watching this movie, it made me think a lot about whenever I was a teacher and seeing friendships between boys and realizing, oh, I bet this happens all the time in America, like all the time, that you'll have two boys who are really close friends. Maybe they are in love with each other. Maybe one of them is in love with the other and the other is completely oblivious and unaware, right? Like, and then they hit that middle school age, and then all of a sudden that gets stomped down. And like this movie presents a much more gentle and tender way of dealing with it and allowing people to embrace it. But I can only imagine, this story remade in, Robertson County, Tennessee, is going to be about a kid getting like gay bashed is what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, there would just be like, there's no moment of these kids going out and like getting ready for church kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I feel like Belgium's fairly similar to the Netherlands in that the church is a part of the culture, but you don't necessarily have a spiritual life connected to the church.
Yeah, and it's like, and I distinctly remember having a conversation with you where it was sort of like I realized, at least in my teens and like middle school, of having really intense female relationships, and a lot of times like girls have intense relationship with one another, but then there's like that barrier where it crossed to like a lesbian relationship at times. And it's also like the struggle of trying to understand your sexuality, which I didn't understand until now that I'm an adult, in reflection towards it being like, oh no, I was secretly in love with this person. I just didn't know what to handle it. And it's also like that delicate balance that this movie does very well, where it's sort of like you can be like it was a gay relationship or it was just a really intense friendship. And it's one where like you can interpret it whichever way you want to. Like you could say that
Mhm.
maybe for Leo it was just an intense relationship, and then for Remy it was more, or it could just be like there was a mutual understanding.
Well, I mean, the title of the movie is just Close.
Yeah.
So you can say, yeah, well, you can't make the argument that it's purely about same-sex relationships. I do think on a bigger level, it's about why do we force people to stop being such close friends at a certain age?
I think
Like even platonically, we tell people, no, you can't be that close to that person unless they're going to be your like partner or
I
something.
think it's this weird thing that with hyper individualism, and there's also like I like remember when I was growing up, I had two very close friends like through like middle school and high school. And my mom distinctively remember like telling me like don't get too comfortable with so and so. And it was just like this weird thing that with or without meaning to, I knew that she was saying it more because like my heart would get broken, and it did get broken. But it's this weird thing of like by cautioning especially children about like what friendships they should have, unless that child is like self-harming and can harm your child, what you're just doing is basically then later on without meaning to is telling your child to be afraid of friendships. And friendships are like deeply meaningful at the end of the day, because sometimes that's the way that you understand that like if your family relationships are like quote unquote normal or healthy, because you can make a comparison between them, you could also just rant about life or a mutual understanding of what's going on. Like I know
Or
that,
simply just see existence from another person's perspective.
yeah, I mean like, and it's this thing of it being like friendships then as you become adult are hard to carry forward because there's not that thing that connects you unless like you keep, practicing the same hobbies together kind of thing. Like you guys
Well,
can easily drift apart.
that's something where, because watching this movie and realizing how a lot of these experiences are alien to me. It's something that just, it won't ever happen to me, right? It's also one of those where I look at it and I go, oh, it's a really clear picture of what friendship looks like and that closeness. And it's one of those where, and I certainly from looking at the statistics, I'm not alone in this. A lot of men my age, Americans, do not have any close friends. And I think on top of that, with my autism, I don't have any close friends. But it is sometimes weird to me because I think like, should I want to have friends? Because there is no desire in me. Like how there's sometimes you have an absence in your life and you can physically feel like, oh, I really want that thing and it hurts that I don't have it. I don't spend any time in my life worried about not having friends. I'm just like, oh, okay. And then
Yeah,
I just do my thing. And I know that like part of that is just it's decades of conditioning of
yeah,
things happening to me where I'm just like, well, we're gonna burn that branch off. We're getting rid of that.
yeah. I don't have those feelings at all in comparison. I tend to have a lot of regret from the way that, like, not even the way that I treat people, because it's a lot of friendships of mine did not end because of the treatment. It's either it ended because that person crossed the boundary that they shouldn't have, or it ended because I just didn't wish to participate in social media anymore. And that was the only way that I could have that person like within my vicinity. And there's a lot of times that like I feel like, oh, well, we could have been really good friends, or I need to make an effort to make friends, because it's almost like this thing of like being acknowledged at times that you are alive, that someone knows that you're there. And it's that thing of also just being special to someone, or feeling as if you're someone's like favorite person. But friendships, can be very hard to maintain, especially now. And I keep touching on hyper individualism, but it also has to do with the fact that we have been conditioned, especially within Western culture, of believing that we cannot be a burden to someone else. We can't take up as much space as we would love to.
We have to be closed
during-
off in order not to burden them.
Yeah, during that time of like pain. And then what happens is, at least for me, a lot of times what I feel is that like I'm a venting space, a locked box for all my friends' feelings. But then the moment that it comes to me to talk about it, which is like this weird thing of some people be like, that's just emotional maturity on your part. I was like, I don't know how to take up space from someone. And it's weird because like you said it, like you don't have any inkling to make friends. Meanwhile, I'm kind of like, I would love to make friends and keep them, but I don't know what my emotional capacity is at the moment for, because like there's always this weird moment when you're making friends with someone that like it's the polite conversation before the real you comes out. Like you're trying to make sure if you're safe to do it, to be yourself. And like we have had instances like that we as a couple have other couple friends. And I do want to acknowledge like your conditioning, because you, with or without intention, will nitpick people, but it's a way of protecting yourself before they come to you to be like, well, I don't like this about him. But it's also because your autism is very much like you are already at a phase where you've talked about, because of your autism, you can tell when someone is like completely disinterested in you, or is already like zoned out, and you can't stop yourself because you're on an info dump. And it's like,
well, there are many instances where you feel the obligation to fill the silence with talking.
yeah.
And then you realize you're not getting anything from the other person. And then you're just like, why are we even doing this?
Because of like, for a lot of people who live with autism, it has to do with the fact that with or without intention, you're regulating your own emotions and you're also trying to regulate the other person's emotions as a protective thing. And like it is a misfortune of sorts, because again, you were conditioned by being homeschooled, by being a shelter, by living in the middle of fucking nowhere, by also your parents not having like regular friends. Like,
and that's another thing. Yeah, I did not have that modeled for me at all.
yeah, and so because that wasn't put in practice for you, I think that's why when you get to a moment where you could make friends with people, is it exhausting for you because it's not a muscle that you've built?
Well, like it's weird because, watching this movie, you see the friendship between the two of them, and it's something that you're like, man, I bet that feels wonderful, right? To be that close to someone. And like, you're my friend, of course. I married you. I wouldn't marry you. And we don't really marry our enemies, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that seems like that, especially at that age. Wow, what a fulfilling thing to have, right? But it's weird because there is not like an ounce of an urge in me at all to seek out friends. It is like that, whatever part of the brain it is that does that part is inactive and has been repurposed for something else.
Because you didn't practice it.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have that practice. Like we've talked about it with like a friend of ours that like works with autistic children, on how they miss certain cues. And it's also like getting them involved in certain things so they can get that practice, and like that pathway in their brains can actually develop and becomes easier. Like you talk about like in college, you exploited that one.
Well, I mean, yeah, I remember having a lot of socializing. Yeah.
Like, and like we have been in social situations where I've seen you enjoy the other people when you actually do enjoy them. But then you're kind of like, once you get home, you're like, I'm not talking to anyone for a month. Like, fuck that. Like, nah, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's one of those where like it's a thing that it's not that I would say like we have many acquaintances.
Yeah.
But I also think it's the idea of friend. Like in this movie, you can see the difference between Leo's friendship with Remy and his acquaintanceship with the other children.
Yeah.
There's a stark difference. And I do think there's some people that throw the term friend around because they're those kind of hyper extroverted social butterflies, and everyone they meet is a friend, in the same way that like a dog who doesn't know any better, everybody's their pal, kind of a thing.
Yeah, the fact that like we say friend, but
that means many different things.
Like there's these different categories of friends. There's work friend, there's like a socialized friend, then there's like
childhood friends,
and
which is a
it's
whole other thing.
like it is like this sad thing that like the media does sell us like these friendships, especially like you consider like the early 2000s and the 90s, that there's a lot of films of guys being friends with
Or
other
girls
dudes.
too.
But like we're talking there's not as many films as there was before. Like
True.
there's like you think about like the last film I can think about that was like a bunch of
Well,
dudes
buddy cop
together
was
is,
a
like,
whole genre.
buddy cop movies. You think about The Hangover, the movie Tag, like it's a bunch like dudes who are like it's always like friends who've been like friends since high school.
Well, and they behave
college.
like they're still in high school. We
Yeah.
don't see it's hard to find a movie that features a serious adult male friendship.
Yeah, like I Love You Man is maybe the closest.
But even still, it's an
Like,
Apatow style comedy.
silly.
Yeah.
And I think it's like for men, it's just now we're just booming into this weird thing of like toxic masculinity where you have a bunch of alpha dudes being friends with alpha dudes, which makes no sense because if you're going to be the alpha, how are you the alpha of your friendships?
Well, it's this thing where it seems like portrayals of masculinity in media, particularly in the States, we'll say, are becoming starkly more binary, where either you're a fucking tough ass bro or you're like gay as hell. And there's no, like, even though we know realistically it's a spectrum of behavior as it is with gender and sexuality, all of it, right? But it's with men in particular, it's just super straight down the line. There's a divide and there's nothing in between.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting for me because, like, for example, I've seen as you like when you were a teacher and you had friendships with like some of your coworkers, especially
I wouldn't call them friendships.
but it was like
see, that's the thing. It's like, once again, friendship, that's to me, a friendship is a very intense connection.
Yeah, I think it's more of an acquaintanceship,
yeah,
like, with another teacher, and it's like this. You've always said that, for example, you're more comfortable around women, but I think it also becomes like this weird thing of being a grown man making a friendship with another woman that is not sexual at all, because like there's always that weird thing of it being like, oh, is he like hitting on me or is it just friendship kind of thing?
And once again, those weren't even friendships, those were acquaintanceships. How often did I hang out with any of these people outside of work? Never.
But it's just like this weird thing that I could understand, like if you ever had an inkling that you'd probably be like, oh, well, we can't cross that barrier because of the way we identify in our own like genders, right? Because that weirdness that follows through. Because I remember like I would have coworkers or even just like my other friends when I'd be like, oh yeah, no, Seth's talking to so and so person, and like they were talking about this, and there is always like that light pause, but be just like, well, aren't you concerned? And it would just be like, to me, there was like, if the concern was there, it was so light because I was just like, well, I like, it's just weird to me because, again, like, because of gender, because of these weird ideologies that we all subscribe to with or without intention, like, guys can't really be guy friends unless like they're super toxic in a way, or they're emulating who they were when they were in college. Like this weird thing of it just being like, well, we're guys, we're gonna go drink and watch football.
Or also like, I hate small talk.
Yeah,
I despise it. I'm at a point in my life where I don't ever want to have small talk ever again.
But then it's also like this weird thing of it being like, well, if your man has a female best friend, then red flag, he's in love with her.
Well, I would even say personally, I would feel weird having a female best friend.
Yeah.
Because I would be like, huh, this is weird.
But like, again,
I mean, at the same time, I have no desire to be friends with men either. I'm like, oh God, no, what a headache.
Again, it has to do with these weird ideas that we have in our brains as to what should it be. when it doesn't have to be that way. Like, there are plenty of people out there that maybe you could have a budding relationship with, that you'd probably be like, I would never want to cross that barrier. I just want to stay a friend with
The
you.
idea of having a budding friendship with anyone sounds exhausting to me. And I'm like, you know what my best friend is? My imagination.
I thought you were gonna say me, but God.
And you too. You're on there too.
I'm the second tier after your imagination.
Outside of my own consciousness, you're my best friend. So yeah, Close. A very thought-provoking movie, as you can tell. A beautifully shot movie. I feel like this movie was more cinematic than all of the Marvel, Disney, Warner, Discovery bullshit we get in theaters that claim to be like a cinematic experience. This one actually was like, oh no, we're going to tell the story mostly through the images, very little dialogue, but you're going to understand all of it.
Yeah.
Would you recommend Close to sort of a wider audience outside of who's basically seen it so far?
Yeah,
probably.
I think you should explore movies that are not strictly just English speaking movies. They're beautifully shot.
Well, and this movie in particular, very accessible.
Yeah.
Just a little over an hour and a half. And you know me, my magic number, that 90-minute mark. This one is perfect. This one actually could have been longer, in my opinion, and I wouldn't have gotten upset about it. But yeah, Close. It's available on all the streaming services that you can rent things from. And if you're clever enough, you can find it in ways where you don't have to rent it. Anyway, we'll be back with our second movie in just a moment. All right, we are back. Our next film is Saint Omer, directed by Alice Diop. It is about Rama, a novelist who attends the trial of Laurence Colli, a young woman accused of killing her 15-month-old daughter. Testimonies from witnesses in Colli's own words soon shake Rama's convictions. That's just kind of the base setting of it. It is Alice Diop, the director, is primarily known as for documentaries. This is her first narrative feature. She is a French Senegalese woman. Or I guess would that be Senegalese French? I don't know which one would come first. And so she actually did this. This is based on a real thing where while she, I think, was pregnant, she attended the trial of another Senegalese woman in Saint Omer who was being tried for the murder of her child. She left the baby on a beach to let the waves carry the baby away. And so the film, apparently in some instances, is word for word the testimony from the trial. So, Ariana, what did you think of Saint Omer?
I did not expect to get sucked into this movie the way that I was.
Mm-hmm.
It was the beginning very kind of like slow, and then
Honestly, like the first 30 minutes, we aren't at the trial.
No,
it's just setting up Rama.
Minutes, yeah, just setting her up. Then we get to the trial, and it's I don't know what it was exactly. I don't know if maybe it was just like the coloring, the way that everybody acted out, but I was in it. I was in it, and like I was captivated. I just could not look away.
This was a movie that, as I was watching it, in my head was like, Ariana's gonna eat this shit up. She's gonna like this more than I do.
Yeah,
that's what's gonna happen. Yeah,
like it was. Again, it was something that I didn't expect, because it was just sort of like, it felt like, okay, this is going to be a slice of life thing,
and it is kind of.
And we don't really figure out like what she's doing until the trial starts happening. And then it's interesting, like the conversations that Rama is having during that time.
Often with herself, it seems like.
Yeah, herself.
Her partner, Adrian.
Yes. So, like, Rama, we see her doing a lecture at a university, explaining about like how these French women were marked by having their hair shaved off. She's explaining to...
When it's... One thing I read, and it's a film and book I'm not familiar with, Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is, I think, a French novel that got turned into a movie about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so someone I saw in a review on Letterboxd was saying how thematically that was telling you what this movie was going to be about by referencing that at the beginning.
Yeah.
But for people like us who weren't familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she's explaining that, like, even though the women are temporarily marked, they are marked for the rest of their lives, which in reflection is what's going to happen to Rama as she's going to watch this trial. What I love is just like, again, we don't know what she's doing. We just know she's working on she's working on a book. And
we don't even know she's pregnant until maybe the last third of the movie.
There is kind of a hint at the beginning, like
it was very subtle.
Yeah, it was more like she's having a meal with her family and her partner who is white. And there's like discussion about like who's gonna take the mom to like a physical appointment. Her other sisters can't. They look at Rama's like, I can't be there, but there's obvious like this tension between the mother and her.
So there's a lot of history there that is intertwined with the things Rama is seeing in the trial.
Yes. And so the implication is that Rama and her partner are asked, are you going on vacation this year? And they're like, actually, we're not going to go on vacation. And this is something to explain to American people is when you live and work in Europe and you work with a European organization, they give you a certain percentage of money so you can go on vacation. The money can be used for vacation, but they said, we're just going to do some updates on the house. They look at each other. They don't explain what it is, but you can pick up the hint that the additional work is going to be like they're fixing their house for the baby. But it was beautifully shot. Like it was.
And it's a movie that doesn't have a lot of things to look at.
Yeah.
Because maybe not 90, but like 80% of the movie is set in a courtroom.
Yes.
Yet it somehow makes that courtroom very visually interesting.
Yes. I think as the courtroom thing is going on, I don't know if she's talking to her partner or a work person who asked her, like, what are your feelings about this? It's all over the news. Apparently, like, she speaks in a very like elegant French.
Laurence, yeah, she's educated because she's a student writing her PhD dissertation on philosophy.
Yes, and Rama explains, like, she's like, no, she doesn't speak eloquently. She just sounds educated. So you can feel like the tension in her response because she's talking to a person who happens to be like white over the phone, who's not understanding that this person is being depicted in the media in a different way than she can pick it up because they are both Black immigrant women at the end of the day.
And there's an interesting tension there in how Laurence is depicted, because part of wanting her to come across as intelligent and of sound mind is in order to get a guilty conviction, right?
Yes.
To say she is completely within her faculties. She murdered her child on purpose. She knows what she did, and she did it anyway. She deserves to be punished.
But it's also the implication that with or without speaking is that because she has an elegant voice, it's, oh, she thinks she's white.
Yeah.
And
like her baby's father is a much older white man who is married to someone else.
Yes. And so Rama, along with Lawrence's mother, are the two only other Black people that we witness within
the courtroom.
But it is just, it's so intense at times.
But it's just people talking.
And it's people talking.
Yeah.
And Lawrence really, like, that character carries a lot of the film along with Rama, at the least, like in their facial expressions, the way they carry themselves.
And it's subtle facial work.
Yes.
You would almost argue, oh, she's stone-faced the whole movie, but it's like, you have to pay attention. Like when certain people say certain things, she gives reactions, but they're almost to the point of being labeled like micro reactions. But if you're paying attention, you're like, oh, that upset her.
Yes. And so Rama ends up talking to Lauren's mother at some point, and it's more like an identification of like, we're both Black women They have a short conversation only for later on when Rama is alone in her hotel room, kind of like sort of in a mourning period, feeling her own pregnancy, having these like thoughts of her own mother, is that she is sought out by this woman to go have lunch together. And that's when you start to almost feel sad for Lawrence, when you start listening to her mother.
Well, and then that goes back to Rama and her troubled relationship with
Yeah.
her mother. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like she orders the steak and fries, and the woman's like, that's too much. And
this woman is a stranger to her.
And that is like, as a response, Rama looks at her and orders a
lager.
Like a lager. Like, she's like, I need alcohol to deal with this fucking woman.
Yeah.
And the woman starts talking about, have you noticed all the newspapers covering this? They say that she's so well spoken. Like, it's a weird sense of pride that her daughter is all over the newspaper.
Because her daughter's likely going to be thrown in prison for like the rest of her life. Yeah.
Yeah.
For infanticide.
And like but she's like, but I don't like the way she responded this morning, because she snapped back at one of the lawyers.
I think it was like she was being cross-examined. Yeah.
And she's like, she needs to be patient and respectful. That is the thing that I taught her. And it's like this, it's a moment that like Rama is sitting there being like, oh God, even as an immigrant woman, we can't even get away with our emotions on a trial that will determine the rest of our lives.
Yeah, it's still, you have to behave properly. And it's like, yeah, I'm gonna be sent away forever.
Yeah. And
the best my defense could come up with is, I'm insane, so you need to lock me in a sanatorium. Yeah. So it's like imprisonment is happening either way.
Yeah, it's like, and there's also at the least, like, Lawrence's lawyer seems to have compassion towards her at the way that she regards the whole thing.
Like her closing statements
her
are really
closing
good, yeah.
statements, the cross-examination towards like the man that she had a child with,
Monte, yeah,
who is like
scum.
Is scum, but he is holding up to his story, clinging it with both hands.
But then she just shreds that story,
yeah,
to the point that he's just basically stunned and can't say anything.
And start going, I don't know. And it is, you start to understand that like Lawrence is completely accepting of the fact that she did kill her child, but she's like, sorcery must have done it because of the depression and anger that she felt. She felt it had to be like, she had to have it been cursed.
It's clear she had a mental breakdown, but she doesn't know how to contextualize that fully. And so it falls back on this, like, somebody cast a spell on me or something. Like,
that's how like it can feel when you're like at your downest. Like, she thought, like, the conversation where she kind of explains that like she went home after she started studying in Paris, and that everybody started to treat her differently, which I was just like, yep, been there. Like, where people will be like, have told me like, oh no, your accent in Spanish sounds so much more American now. And you're just like, okay, so now you're just going to erase my whole fucking culture and nationality for your own goddamn fucking benefit. And how she was like, Lawrence has this idea. She was trained, like she was pushed her whole life to go study in like Paris, where she was forbidden to speak her native tongue because her mother wanted her to speak perfect French, which did not allow her to make friends with the other kids around her. And so when she realizes she gets to this place and she's not going to be successful, that is the only other idea that she has in her head. She was cursed. She was fucking cursed.
And it's the fact that like a lot of this is directly from the transcripts that the director sat through the actual trial of. And the whole thing is, the director herself, Alice Diop, Senegalese French parents, were immigrants, so she's first generation, attended the Sorbonne, which is where she eventually decided she wanted to make films, specifically documentaries. And her documentaries have been exploring the themes of this movie, but with real people. And sort of, where does someone like her, and she's, I think, maybe like 43, 44, where does she fit in this society where she knows she doesn't assimilate entirely just because of how she looks.
Yeah.
But she still, from what I can tell, she still identifies as being French, but she also identifies as Senegalese, like as both things.
Like you can't really separate one from the other because it's this idea of like then her thoughts are probably in French. Then
Yeah.
the way she lives her life is as a French woman. But the remark is like when she goes like to her parents' native, well, you're a French woman. That's all that you are. But to French people, you are not because you are not white.
What did you think of the Rama relationship with her mother? Because we get it at the beginning of the movie, it kind of disappears as we focus on the court trial. And then at the end, there's this sort of facsimile of, 90s home video footage of like a birthday party or a dinner. And then we see that relationship again.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of that relationship and how that added to an understanding of the film?
I think it made it, I don't know if you picked up on the sensation that she felt that she was an unwanted child.
Her mother never directly regards her. Like she doesn't even look at her more often than not.
There is a remark at the beginning on how like her sister's like, you need to put an effort of taking care of her. But when the care that was given to her was so minimal, or it feels like it's minimal and
passive.
It's passive.
It was obligation.
Yeah, I put a roof over your head. I fed you, but that doesn't mean I have to be emotionally connected to you. Like even the image of her watching her mother get ready, basically like cover herself in gold and jewels, but still be crying and still knowing that she is going to perform. And it is at the end, it seems like as if she has forgiven her mother, but it's like this thing to contend with where she is
it's not like a warm and fuzzy
forgiveness. She talks to her husband being like, I don't want to be my mother, and he's like, your mother is like a broken woman and you are not broken. But what does that have to say about you as a person if that is the love that you received?
Well, her mother's an enigma even for the audience. Like we don't really know. When he says she's a broken woman, we know that she has health problems just simply because of her age, but it certainly feels like there's a lot more going on there. And I don't know if we're supposed to just simply infer it's the result of being an immigrant in this culture and how it just beat her down to a certain point that she just doesn't feel anything about anyone anymore.
I mean, I could understand that occurring because I think if I relate it to at least the experience of moving to the Netherlands, it's like people have this perception of you that you're not fulfilling exactly. And so it feels like what you're just going to have to do is undersell yourself. So all these things that maybe you thought that you were going to be able to achieve are like you're going to have to almost underestimate everything. And that like no matter what happens, it's like you're never going to assimilate the way that like that culture wants you to assimilate, or that culture would then go like, yeah, no, you're one of us now, kind of thing. And then the hardship that comes with it, like at the end scene is Rama's mother just mumbling that she's so tired.
Yeah.
So tired. And it's like it's as if the weight of the world and all the hard work like finally came crashing down on her.
Well, she doesn't even seem like a person. She's just this thing that's existing.
Yeah.
And like just you could feel that how she just wants death at a certain point.
Or
like,
it's just also just sort of like it's hard to find joy at times in a world that you feel like doesn't want you.
Yeah.
And that has to be hard for an immigrant. And then top of that, you brought your children in for a better life. And they might have a better life, but there's going to be like a certain resentment because they don't fit in fully to a certain degree. Or it's also you did not give them the love and compassion, because to them, like, well, you gave all your energy to your work, but all that energy that was supposed to go to work was the thing that provided a roof over your head, like food on the table. Like, it is conflicting in so many manners, because it's sort of like you leave the place that you were from because you couldn't feel that it could give you more, but you go into a place that will give you even less at the end of the day. And like, you're questioning yourself, like, can I survive on scraps? And can I survive on this solely? While also looking behind you and being like, a shark's coming to eat up my land, kind of thing. It's sort of like, it's like it's one that you like, when I think about it that way, I have like sympathy for the mother, but that doesn't
excuse
excuse the lack of love that Rama seemed to have like felt towards her mother.
When I feel like Rama's interest in the trial is not necessarily that she feels a connection to Laurence, it's that she sees a connection between Laurence and her mother, because Laurence is a mother who killed her own child.
Yeah.
And Rama is a daughter whose mother barely acknowledges she exists. And so I think in watching the trial and listening to Laurence, she's trying to figure something out about her own mother.
Yeah.
Which is why near the end of the movie, when Laurence looks and gives that like little half smile, because Rama's the only Black woman in the court, it upsets Rama intensely.
Yeah.
Because she's feeling empathy and sees humanity in this woman, which in turn is causing her to re-examine her feelings about her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of wrestling, and especially with that final scene, Diop puts that in the movie for a reason. The mother going, I'm so tired, because Rama's come to a point where now she can have empathy with her.
Yeah.
That I understand why you're tired. I don't forgive you for the absence of love and tenderness in my life, but I can acknowledge your pain.
Yeah.
And I understand why you have become like you are.
Yeah.
And so what ultimately you just have pity.
Yeah, because it's just it, and I think you are correct in that manner. And I think there's also this feeling that for a lot of particularly young women, but a lot of just young people in general, like when they know that mostly their mom, but it could be like any parent, has gone through so much suffering, like part of you almost wishes if you could change time to stop yourself from being born, but to give them a better life, like you would. Like, if you could have given them the option to go like somewhere else that wouldn't have made the damage that could have made them happy, you would have done it in a heartbeat. It's the same that a lot of people feel about like their own like ancestors. Like I've talked to this with you in the past. Like, if I could have remedied it any way that like none of my like ancestors were slaves or were like colonized, and that I would cease to exist, I would be okay with that, because it would mean like a happier group of people that didn't have to endure such the pain that they did. And that is, I feel like, with immigrant parents or parents that sacrifice so much, you have that feeling like I've even heard artists that I think like Azila Banks has a whole song about her just being like, if I could have stopped being born to prevented you from going through what you prevented to, I would have done it. Because you see your parent, and you also was like, you can't help but think to yourself at times, what could have you been had you not been a parent? What type of person would you have been had you not married this person that ended up being your partner?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that is something that like can weigh heavy on like kids that have gone through like certain
because it means the erasure of your existence.
Yeah.
So that was our Mother's Day. I mean, I didn't realize it until we were recording, like, oh, it is Mother's Day, and we picked quite a movie for Mother's Day about infanticide. But isn't it the most motherly of things to commit infanticide? So would you recommend Saint Omer to a wider audience, or do you feel like I feel like this would be a more challenging movie to access for most people?
I say try it, because again, I did not expect to be as absorbed as I was in this film. But if you are not a person who can like handle a lot of conversation without much visual, like if you need a little trinket like in front of you,
If
like
your favorite movies are Marvel movies, you're not gonna
no,
like
but
this
then
movie.
again, why would you be listening to this podcast?
I don't know. There's some freaks out there.
But I still feel like it's a very good film. I think the acting was very good. I think the writing was intelligent. The
Uh,
last closing remarks from like the
the lawyers,
lawyer
yeah,
was
very good.
so good.
I felt very proud of myself as a little movie nerd because while we were watching it, I go, I bet this director really likes Robert Bresson, who we've seen two of his films, Mouchette and L'Argent. And sure enough, I Googled it, and LSD, very influenced by Robert Bresson. So this movie is Bressonian in that regard. I also saw that she referenced an appreciation of the works of Chantal Akerman, who we've only seen one film of, which is Jean Dielmand, which is Sight and Sound's #1 movie of all time now, which is very, I would say, is even more mundane than this movie.
Yeah, like much more slower than this.
But this is still like, it's in that vein of, this isn't a movie that you should turn on at 2 a.m. to watch. You maybe have a cup of coffee, especially if you're an American, or you watch a lot of Western entertainment, American entertainment, and you've been conditioned to need to have like a dopamine hit every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And to be like visually overstimulated. This movie is visually stimulating, but not in the way like nerds are stimulating as a candy. It's a movie that it expects as much from you as it's putting into itself. This has been the Pop Cult Podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for any links to reviews or other relevant places, including popcult.blog, which is our website where we post reviews every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, extra stuff on the weekends. If you visit popcult.blog, you're going to find we're in the middle of a series titled The American Theater on Film. We've reviewed a lot of movies so far, like A Streetcar Named Desire, 12 Angry Men. Coming up soon in that series, we'll be doing movies like Death of a Salesman, Glengarry Glen Ross, and we're going to wrap it up at the end of the month with Angels in America. If you appreciate what we do on the podcast or over on popcult.blog, we would ask if you would consider supporting us on Patreon. We have lots of different tiers that you can join at with different benefits at each tier. I want to thank our patrons, Morphine, who donates at our sneak preview level, and Becca and Matt, who both donate at our writer's room level. At the writer's room level and above, you get to pick one movie a month that we will watch, review, and you can even add your own thoughts to that review if you so wish. Well, until next time, keep listening.